I said, we're going to lose tobacco farmers. We're going to have to find an alternative. And he said, well, what are you proposing? And I said, well, Governor, I said, you live on one of the biggest hemp farms back in the 1800s and early 1900s in the county here. And I said, we've got a rich history. My grandfather grew hemp.
I'm really excited to have you on today, and I'm really excited to share what you're doing and kind of your experience in the industry and so forth. So I'd love first for anybody that's listening or watching to please like, share, subscribe. We have lots of content at globalhempassociation.org and on our YouTube channel and Spotify, Google, there's lots of podcast opportunities. Anyways, Joe, I'm really thrilled to introduce you and to have you on today and kind of get your background and experience in the industry. I'd love for you to give a quick rundown about who you are and what you've done and how you got into this. How did you start in this industry?
Well, things in our lives kind of dictate what happens next. And I was living in Belize, building roads and bridges and low-income housing for refugees. And the government changed. We lost all our contracts, and all my road and bridge equipment was left down there. And I came back to just kind of wait and see what was going to happen with the government change. And so I go back down 5 or 6 weeks later, and all my equipment has been scavenged. So I lost, I don't know, a couple $1 million worth of equipment in the jungles of Belize. So thinking that was one of the worst things that could ever happen in my life, I come back and trying to decide, okay, what am I going to do next? And in the meantime, I was reading these newspapers, old back in the 1940s, and I came across this article that said F.G. Clay resigns from the Kentucky Hemp Growers Co-op. And so I was like, we've got the Kentucky Tobacco Growers Co-op, but what's this? And, it said he was resigning at the behest of President Roosevelt to come to Washington, D.C. and run the Hemp for Victory program. So I'd heard about the Hemp for Victory program, and I knew Gatewood Galbraith, who ran for governor 3 or 4 times in Kentucky on the marijuana, or really cannabis platform. So I knew about, cannabis, but back then, hemp and marijuana were just exactly the same thing. If you said something to somebody, mentioned the word hemp, hemp and marijuana were synonymous. So anyway, that piques my interest. So I went to the Secretary of State's office in Kentucky to ask, if they had the records. And he looked at me like, this guy, what's he up to, marijuana. And so he looked in the computer and he said, oh, we don't have it. It's not in here. And I went, are you sure? And he went, yeah. I said, nope. And so now I'm like, okay, it's a dead end, and there's another one of those moments where in your life, things, turn out different, because I left the Secretary of State's office and walked up to the, walked out the door and walked down the hall, and they've got these, at the Capitol, they've got all these big wide halls with marble all over them. And so I'm 15, 20 feet down the hall, and I hear something, and I don't know what, I'm like, well, so I turned around and stuck my head in the door. I said, did you say something? And he said, yeah. He said, what year was that? And I went, I would have been like the 1940s. And he went, he said, that wouldn't be in our records here anyway. That would be down in the archives. He said, and this is a Friday. So he says, give me your name and phone number, and if I find something next week, I'll let you know. And so I did. So Monday morning, 9 o'clock, the phone rings. It's like, I found, you know, he's all excited. I said, whoa, who is this? He said, it's Jerry over the Secretary of State's office. He said, I found all the records for the Kentucky Hemp Growers Co-op. I was going, you're kidding. He says, no, he said, I got everything. And so I hopped in the car. Drove straight there and looked at all the tax records and the original corporation records. And they had like 17 people signed the original corporation papers. I'm like, I've never seen, and I guess maybe in associations they do that, but I'd never seen where you had so many people signed on to a corporate document. So I took it to a friend of mine whose dad owned the largest family-owned tobacco company in the world. And his dad was real big in agriculture back in the 40s. And so went to him and showed him, and he said, this is who's who in the agriculture industry back in the 40s. And now I'm like, okay, something's up here. So that's kind of what got me started. And it's like that saying, you know, you stick your toe in the water, and next thing you know, you're up to the ears in alligator. So I found out my grandfather grew hemp, you know, that Europe was just getting ready to allow all these countries to start growing hemp. France had been growing hemp and producing Bible and rolling papers. Canada was getting ready they were petitioning the Canadian government because they're part of the EU also, and through England. So all this stuff was going on. I collected all this information. And then another seminal moment, this was in I think spring or summer of 1994. And not, you know, I don't sit around and just listen to the radio, but the radio happened to be on, and I hear Governor Jones is having open door at 4, which he opens the doors up, you come in, sign up about what you want to talk to him about, and anybody can go in and talk to him. So I end up going over there, and I wasn't going to tell him I wanted to talk to him about hemp. And so I said, I want to talk to him about, you know, because this is when all the tobacco executives were telling, they were swearing in front of Congress that they didn't think nicotine was addictive. Mm. And so, you know, and I saw the writing on the wall that we were going to lose tobacco. And back then you couldn't drive a quarter mile in any direction in Kentucky and not see tobacco. And now what's it, 28 years later or 26 years later, and you can drive all day long and never see a tobacco patch. And if you do, it's like 200 or 300 acres. So I told him, I wrote down that I want to talk to him about tobacco. So I go in and I start talking to him. I said, you know, we're going to lose tobacco farmers. You know, we're going to have to find an alternative. And he said, well, what are you proposing? And I said, well, Governor, I said, you live on one of the biggest hemp farms back in the 1800s and early 1900s. You know, in the county here. And I said, we've got a rich history. My grandfather grew hemp. And then I started showing him the European Union's rules and all these pictures and this equipment that I'd found in Paris, Kentucky. I showed him this book about the hemp history of Kentucky. And I showed him all this stuff. And at the end of it, I said, Governor, do you have a piece of paper? And he looked at me, yeah, so let me have a piece of paper. And he handed me a piece of paper. And underneath some of this equipment I'd found in Paris, Kentucky, there was a bunch of fiber underneath of it. So I took that fiber, cut it up, beat it up with a hammer, and finally turned it into powder. Man, it took forever. But I got one of those paper screens to make paper with and made a sheet of paper. It would rattle. It was like Bible paper.
Sure.
And so I took that and laid it on his paper and cut out an even square, both of them. And I said, do you have a match? And he's like, well, yeah. He gives me a match, and I light the regular writing paper up, and it burns and leaves this big crust there. And then I lit the hemp paper I made, and it just went poof. It turned into this like real fine, tiny gray speck.
Yeah.
And he looked at that and he went, whoa. And in hindsight, I don't know why I did it, but I think that kind of made an impact on him.
Sure.
And I don't know why, because it really, in retrospect, it didn't mean anything. And
it caught his attention.
Well, yeah. So, but then he looked at me and he said, well, Joe, he said, if you were me, he said, if you were governor, he said, what would you do? And I said, well, Governor, if it was me, I would form a task force to look into seeing if what I'm telling you is true or not. And he said, well, Joe, he said, I have no doubt that what you're telling me is true. And I said, well, Governor, it's not really that. It's public perception. If you have a task force, then it gives validity to what they say.
Sure.
And it's just not you saying it. And he looked at me, he said, Joe, he said, you're exactly right. And he looked at, what was James' last name? He was his agricultural liaison. And he said, James, he said, I want you to work with Joe. And he said, let's do this. So that was kind of what really got the ball rolling. And then after that, that afternoon or the next day, I'd been working with a buddy of mine, Dave Spalding, and Andy Graves was a guy that he worked with that was a big vegetable farmer at the time. And so I told Dave, and this was before I met with the governor, but I told Dave, I said, we got to go start collecting seeds because, they're destroying all the wild hemp out there. They had the marijuana eradication or the cannabis eradication program, and where they were giving the sheriffs or police, state, whoever it was, they were giving so much per plant that they destroyed.
Yes, yeah.
So Dave knew a bunch of the farmers because he had worked for the University of Kentucky. And that's how he introduced me to Andy, because Andy had a bunch of hemp growing on his farm. So met Andy, we collected seeds, then I meet with the governor, and then we meet with Andy's dad, who was the emeritus chairman of the board of National City Bank. He was like a pillar of the community, and he had just retired. So we go in and meet with him, and I was telling him, I met with the governor, he's going to do this task force. And, we found the Kentucky Hemp Growers Co-op, and, I want to tell you about hemp and what's happening in the world. And he looked at me, he said, you don't have to tell me anything about hemp. He pointed over to the wall, and there's a picture of him as a 16-year-old kid with this suit on and this little fedora type hat out in a field weighing up hemp with one of the field hands. And he said, I grew hemp. He said, I harvested the crop when my dad died when I was 16. Oh, he said, so what do you want? I said, I'd like for you to be the chairman of the board of the Kentucky Hemp Growers Co-op. And Andy's going to be the president, because he was the president of the Fayette County Farm Bureau. So he was known by all the farmers. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'll be the executive director and do the day-to-day stuff. So that is what kicked off the whole thing. And a side story that's it's just hard to believe, but during the war, Andy's dad, Jake, who is now, he's the chairman of the board of the Kentucky Hemp Growers Co-op. His dad had he'd collected all the hemp seeds for in Kentucky, Illinois, Tennessee, Missouri. He'd collected all the hemp seeds, so he had this tobacco warehouse just full of hemp seeds. And so the government came in and confiscated it for the war effort, and they took the seed and gave it to the Kentucky Hemp. They formed the Kentucky Hemp Co-op in order to redistribute Jake's father's seed. And now Jake is the chairman of the board of the organization that that distributed his dad. And I mean, it's so
No
out, it's hard to believe.
Yeah, there are no accidents, right?
So yeah, and then okay, so this starts rolling. We're getting, we'd been getting press. We were going to Farm Bureau meetings. We were going to county fairs. Any place where something where we could help educate the people. Mm-hmm. And so we were getting a lot of PR. And a buddy of mine was a friend of Woody Harrelson's, and he had told Woody about what I was doing. So one day my phone rings, and it's like, Woody, and I'm like, but when my son answered the phone, and Woody said, "Is Joe Hickey there?" And he was going, he said, "Yeah." I said, "This is Joe." And Joe was young then, and Woody's going, "Well, maybe your dad." And so Joe said, "Who's calling?" He says, "Woody." And so Joe comes in, and I'm thinking somebody's playing a prank on me. So I, answer the phone. It sounded like Woody. And so we talked for about an hour, and he said, "Well, I'd like to come in and meet you." And this is on a Tuesday. And I went, "Sure." And he said, "What's a good time?" I said, "Anytime." He said, "What about Thursday?" So he comes in Thursday, and I pick him up. And when we first met, because I have 7 brothers and a sister. So I grew up in a big family. And another kind of ironic thing that happened, my younger brother, Bob, had passed away a few months earlier. And he was this guy that when he walked into the room, you just felt his presence. He was just the kindest, nicest. I mean, it's just hard to describe the kind of heart and soul that he had. And here comes Woody, and it's like Bob coming back. I mean, I get cold chills thinking about it right now. So that evening, Woody called his wife up, Laura and Denny, and said, "I want you to meet Joe. You guys fly in tomorrow." So they flew in and stayed for, I think, 3 days, and then left. And when Woody left, he said, let's start a business. Let's do whatever we need to do. I'm here to help. So that's led to a 26-year friendship, I guess. And so we did a lot of things in the meantime. We did a survey that showed 76% of Kentuckians somewhat or strongly favored letting farmers grow hemp. Woody and I came up with the idea of planting the hemp seeds. Planted 4 hemp seeds because 5 hemp seeds was a felony. So we orchestrated that whole thing in Kentucky in '96, and then so that trial went to 2000, and Woody was found not guilty. And it's just a longer story than what we've got time for here today. Yeah. But I will tell a story at the end that I like to share with people. Is I had Governor Nunn, who was a friend of mine. He was governor when Nixon was the president. He was a right-wing law and order governor, Republican governor. So, and he's an older gentleman then. He knew about hemp and everything, and he knew about Woody's trial. And I asked him, I said, "Would you do the closing statement at Woody's trial?" And he went, "Sure." And so he's doing a closing statement, and I'd given him a hemp candy bar. And so he has it, and he's telling the jurors, first of all, he's telling the jurors that, you can't, what jury notification is. Mm-hmm. Okay. So he's basically saying, he's looking at jurors and going, "Look, if they're growing it everywhere in Europe and everything. And so this law is not a fair law. So, if you think that the law is not fair, then you're the last bastion for adjudicating what's a law that's wrong, and you can't do that." But he's a governor. The judge what's the judge is going to do? The judge is going to say, "Quit saying that." But so he let him, get away with that. But he was giving his arguments, and he said, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, jury," he said, he reached his jacket. He said, "I've got this hemp bar with me." And he said, with permission of the court, and he didn't ask permission, he just assumed it as the governor. He said, I'm going to take a bite of this. So he takes a bite, and he sits there and chews it up. He's looking around at the jurors and everything, and he's going, well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said, I got it on me, and he said, I got it in me. He said, so if you're going to convict this man right here, he said, you're going to have to convict me too. And you could see the jurors were just like, okay. And then he closed it out by saying, he was standing right next to the prosecutor's desk, and he was going, ladies and gentlemen, he said, my esteemed colleague, Tom Jones, says that, because he had already given his closing argument, he said, Mr. Harrelson's simply here because he's trying to legalize marijuana. And he said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said, if I thought that for 1 second, and he slammed his hand down on the table real hard, and Tom just startled him because he's down writing. He said, I'd be sitting at this table right here. And that's how he ended it. And so he walks out, comes down, sits down, the juror goes away. And it's funny because they come back into the courtroom, and I looked down at my watch, and it's exactly 4:20. And I'm watching them, and they're all looking as they come in. They're looking at us sitting there at the table, and I leaned over and I said, Woody, I said, it's not guilty. And he said, how could you possibly know that it's not guilty? And I said, well, they're looking at you. If it was guilty, they wouldn't be looking at you. And he said, really? And I went, yeah. He said, we'll see. So it was not guilty. And so that was that kind of, in the meantime, we had been talking to legislators about trying to get a bill passed. And they said, well, we're not going to do anything until, because people still had the idea that hemp and marijuana were the same thing. And they said, until you educate the public about it, we're not going to do it. So that was the reason that Woody funded that University of Kentucky research that showed 76% of the people were somewhat or strongly in favor. So we took that, we were going to the legislators. We didn't get the bill passed in 2000, but in 2001, the year after Woody's trial, or really it was only a few months after Woody's trial. And so we went to the legislators, and we were, we're making some good headway, and we met with the president of the Senate, and Tom, what was his name? David Williams. So David said, well, if you guys can get the votes, I'll let it come to the floor, knowing we couldn't get the votes. He knew we couldn't. So we get the votes, we get more than what we needed, and he was not letting it be heard.
Oh.
So I go see the governor, and Governor Nunn, who had helped us out with Woody's trial. And I told him, I said, look, David said he would let this thing hit the floor, and it's not. He's not letting it hit the floor. And he said, do you have the votes? I said, yeah, we've got the votes. He said, are you sure? And I went, I know we have the votes. And he said, jump in the car. So we drive to Frankfurt and go up to David Williams' office and walk in, and he just walks right past the secretary, and just, I'm following him, and the lady's turn, she says, no, Governor, he has somebody in there with him. And Governor looks at her, and he said, that's fine. And he said, Joe, just wait here. So I sit down, he walked in the door, and about 4 or 5 minutes later, a guy walks out, and then another 4 or 5 minutes later, he walks out, and he said, let's go. And so we go down the hall, and he said, it's going to be heard. So we get a vote, it passes, the governor signs it. And the one thing that made a difference for Kentucky is I had the forethought of adding one sentence at the end of the bill that said that Kentucky immediately adopts any and all federal rules and regulations pertaining to industrial hemp. And so when the Farm Bill passed in 2014, and, there's a lot of stuff that happened after that. We started a company in Canada, Kennex, that we were growing and processing and importing hemp. And so we had developed a seed variety called Denny after Woody's daughter. And so we had the seed up there, and we had basically the company was shut down because we were harassed with customs and DEA about bringing stuff over the border, and they we were sending live seed to the bird feed industry, and they came back and threatened to fine us if we didn't bring back, I don't know, it was 5 or 6 loads of hemp seed. And so we filed a suit against them. But anyway, so all that, a lot of that went on, but we had the seed in Canada that we had developed. So when the Farm Bill passed, we met with Jamie Comer, who's representative now, but he was the ag commissioner. And we said, well, we've got some seed that we'd like to plant. And I said, but it wasn't in the country yet. And so he said, look, he said, if you have hemp seed and it's in the state, it's legal. I went, okay. So we, I won't say we smuggled it, because we didn't. We just had UPS send it to us. Mm-hmm. And so what got us ahead is that when the Farm Bill passed, we didn't have to get the legislators to come in and say, okay, we're going to have to pass a bill to allow university research and set up all this stuff, because we had already adopted federal rules and regulations with that legislation. So we were able to go right at it immediately. So that's what got us started. And but that's the short version of what happened. I skipped over a lot of things, but that's how I got started.
So when you talk about putting all of your archives together, that's what you're talking about, is building this story around
right.
how hemp basically started again in the United States, and who the players were. And I love this stuff. I love, knowing. So knowing then where it's been and where it's going, what's the big, what should people be paying attention to?
Well, I think the biggest thing right now, Mandi, is, what was the last major crop introduced into the American agriculture? Soybeans. It started back when Henry Ford and George Washington Carver and all those guys were working with soybeans to look at what they could do with it. And it took 40, 50 years for that to become a mainstream crop. So the historical value of what's going on right now is this is going to be the last major crop ever introduced into the American agriculture. There's just nothing else out there. If there was, we wouldn't have been 40 years waiting on it.
Right.
And we already had a history of doing it. So we know it'll grow anywhere from Florida to Alaska. And there's different areas that would grow good for fiber. There's different areas that grow good for seed. But I think the important thing, knowing the history and everything about it, the important thing right now is for the farmers to realize that, this is an agricultural crop. It's not a horticultural crop. It can be a horticultural crop, but it's not, all farmers aren't horticulturists. So it's to be a mainstream crop, you have to be an agricultural crop. And when this whole thing got sideways, and I'm working with CBD right now, but I say CBD hijacked the hemp industry, because what happened was that we were looking at fiber and seed and grain, processing it, making food out of it, turning the fiber into car parts. That was our original focus. And then I got a call from Josh Stanley, one of the Stanley brothers, and he was going, CBD is going to be, it's going to be the big thing in the future. And he was right, because then, what happened is the first couple of years, farmers were kind of like, I don't know, I don't know enough about it, so I'm not going to do it. But the farmers that jumped in early made great money. And, they were probably making somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 an acre.
Yeah.
Early on.
When isolate was selling for thousands of dollars?
When I first started, isolate back in, I think it was 2015, was $70,000 a kilo. That same kilo you can buy today for like $400 or $500.
Mhm.
But what happened is the same thing that happened in Canada in, I think it was 97 or 98, when Canada legalized hemp. Were there for a couple of years. The farmers that grew it made some good money. And then all these other farmers saw what was going on. And so you had all these farmers jumped in and started growing hemp for seed. And all of a sudden, the market wasn't there for all of the production. And so you had all these farmers now that were stuck with all this seed. A lot of them lost a lot of money in the middle of it. So the exact same thing happened with CBD.
Mhm.
And so the first couple of years, everything was great. And then I remember it was the spring of 1993, two years ago. I started realizing what I was thinking. Look, they're growing all this CBD material. How much CBD is it going to take? Because I can't believe how much CBD. There was like, I don't know, 30,000 acres or something like that of CBD growing in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And the majority of the crops were CBD. So I got to figuring, and I said, okay, let's just say there's 300 million people in the United States. If everybody uses a bottle of a 1 ounce bottle of 2,400 milligrams, which is probably more than what they would use, but let's just figure that on the high side, if they used a bottle a month, that's 12 bottles per person. So it's 12 times 300 million. And that gives you how many bottles that you would have to produce. And then I just figured back from there, and I was figuring on the high side just to,
Yeah.
So I get down to the spot where I realized that Kentucky, because when I got down, okay, the number was still big, and I was going, okay, that number's too big. But even though it's that big, we've only penetrated 10% of the market. So now you have to multiply that by 10. And now we were growing enough in Kentucky alone to supply the whole United States, every single man, woman, and child for 10 years in Kentucky alone. And it was growing everywhere. So I remember the first, it was the Southern Hemp Expo. I spoke there, and I think it was in September, because I was telling the farmers, I said, if you guys don't have a contract and you don't know that it's a solid contract with a reputable, firm, then you better be looking at what you're going to do with that crop. And I think people kind of started listening, but it still didn't get out there. Actually, I just read something, was it called Pan X or Pan Exchange X or whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
A quote from whoever the president is.
Mm-hmm.
I read it today. She's going, we're growing way too much hemp out there to supply the market. And she was kind of breaking it down. And I was going, well, it only took her 2 years, to catch up. But
and I get calls. I actually just had a call today about somebody calling for the same thing. They grew and didn't have a contract and don't know what to do. And my heart goes out to these people because they're losing millions of dollars and all their savings and their farm. And
it's a travesty. Yeah, it's a travesty, because CBD is not an agricultural crop.
Right.
CBD is like, it's going to be like cannabis or, marijuana crop.
I always say it's like the craft wine or craft beers,
exactly
right?
right?
We're gonna have these craft grows, these boutique grows. They're
Right.
not commodity grows. They're not growing in row crops, agriculture, like you said.
No, because what we're doing, the company that I've got right now, we're not going to be buying hemp CBD for CBD on the open market. you know, we're gonna contract with probably 3 or 4 farmers to grow everything that we need for production, because we're not going to need, you know, a few hundred acres.
Right.
You know, so we don't need a whole lot. And so what people need to understand, if you're going to start a brand or have a company that's going to succeed, you have to have the genetics in there. You have to pick your genetics so you can have consistency in your product. Because if you don't have consistency in your product, what it's like is having a key and the lock that has all the different tumblers, and those different tumblers are the amount of CBD, THC, CBG, CBN,
All the variables,
cannabinoids. So one key may slide in there and work for Alzheimer's, and one key might go in there and help with eczema. So it with different keys, so it's different genetics have a different effect that that you may want for your company.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be, you know, it's like tobacco is now. Tobacco is contract grown. You know, these tobacco companies will contract with one farmer. He's growing, you know, 200, 300 acres, and they're getting all the exact same quality that they have, where before they were buying anywhere from 1/4 of an acre to 5 acres, and it's all different. And so now they have more consistency in their end product than they did before, and that's where it's going. So, but hemp being an agricultural crop is going to be it's going to be phenomenal. You know, just adding another crop in the rotation of the field for these farmers is going to be great.
What are some of the benefits? Can you, like, if
Well,
someone asks, give me five top benefits to hemp?
well, I mean, the biggest one is what it does for the soil. Is it has a deep taproot, so it breaks the soil up deeper, and it makes it better for crops that follow it. There was a study in Canada that if you grow hemp and follow it with soybeans, you'll get like a 10 to 20% increase in yield, because hemp is not a host for the cyst nematodes, and that's what attacks soybeans. So it kind of clears the fields out, so the soybeans doesn't have the issue with so bad with the cyst nematodes. And there's so many misnomers about hemp. It'll grow anywhere. You know, weeds won't grow in it. It doesn't need a lot of water. It doesn't need a lot of fertilizer. You know, early on you hear all that, but the truth is, it's like tobacco or corn or anything else. You've got to have good ground. You have to have water. You have to have, you know, good fertilizer. You know, I mean, you need all the things you need for a great crop. So, you know, what I think really hurt the industry early on was all these people saying all these things. You know, I will say hemp is probably more drought tolerant than any other crop.
Sure.
You know, it's going to thrive better if it has water. So I would think that's probably, you know, the things that people don't know that they should know about hemp. It's just a regular crop, you know.
Well, and there's variables, right? I think just like in the CBD space, I'm seeing in the fiber industry, different seeds grow different crops for different end use, whether it's the textile industry or the construction or the oil and gas, right? If we're making biofuels, my understanding is the oil content from a hemp seed compared to any other natural.
Well, that's it. The one thing I'll say is that was one of the things that people talk about is using it for biofuels. But do you have any idea? Oh, my dog's walking in here with muddy feet out. And so, but what you have is that distracts me. What was I saying?
Biofuels. We were talking about seed.
Yeah, biofuels.
Seed grown.
No, but you know how much a gallon of hemp seed oil is right now? Oh, somewhere between $25 and $45 a gallon. So it's not really an oil that you can use for, it's not cost effective. You know, you may be able to use like they do corn and grind up the whole plant, once you harvest and get the seed out of it and make a biofuel out of it. But my contention has always been we've lost, what they say, half of our topsoil in the last 200 years. So if we start using our topsoil for something besides food, then if we start, if you start growing millions of acres and using it as fuel, you're basically just robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah, that makes sense. This actually came up the other day, this argument of using the seed, if it's being grown for food like soybean or any of these others, taking our food source when our people are starving. And that makes sense with our land. I mean, it's
well, this really isn't the topic we're on, but if we're talking about sustainability and growing crops, for food, we need to quit growing crops for animals.
right.
I mean, in all reality, if we use those same crops to feed people, we've got more food that would feed the whole world right now. But like I say, that's a different story to get into. But
there's a lot of broken, and I'll tell you what, hemp and bringing hemp into this has uncovered a lot of broken, and a lot of passions I didn't know I had.
Right. Well, what people say that hemp can do everything, or it's the answer to everything, and I said, no, hemp's not the answer to everything. There's no doubt about that, but it sure is a key to a lot of things that can make this world a better place. And for future,
it's an alternative solution, right? It's something we can harvest and grow. And with the one thing that comes up often is the carbon, the carbon footprint, and the benefit for farmers that hasn't been available, or that for the first time now we're sustainable and profitable, right? Usually when I'm in a room with investors and the word sustainable comes up, investors are like, no, we're good, because we're not going to make money on it. Where now they actually have that opportunity.
Well, the only reason we hadn't made money at it is because the alternative is so much cheaper right now. And, it's like what the small town I grew up in had a t-shirt factory. They had a shirt factory. They had a dress where they were making clothes, and everybody was buying those clothes and supporting those factories. And the factories were basically supporting the community. And what happened is when, I forget who it was, but when all these big industries started going to South America and China and every place else to get cheaper
manufacturing,
cheaper goods, then it just basically killed the local. We used to have guys that made shoes. We used to go when 8 kids, 9 kids. We'd had the guy that made shoes for all of us. And, we had a local grocery store. Granddad brought milk to us and eggs. We basically just, it was just like a big community. And now, everything's bought overseas. You got the Walmarts and the big box stores that everybody goes to now, and everything's consolidated. It's basically what happened back when, the Industrial Revolution. There was a fight that nobody knows about. There was a group included Henry Ford, George Washington Carver, was it James Hale, I think, was the guy that was kind of the leader of it, but it was called the Chemergy movement. And the Chemergy movement was basically, you can make anything you can make from a hydrocarbon, you can make from a carbohydrates. Hydrocarbons are just carbohydrates under heat and pressure in millions of years that turned into hydrocarbons. So they knew that. And so, the bake lights, the old phones, the things you hang up, you'd pick up and ring the phone. Those things were made out of plant material. It was bake light. So they made plastics out of it. And so their dream was, we're going to take the Industrial Revolution and have it fueled by all these farmers across the whole United States. So you would spread that wealth everywhere. And
Yeah.
what happened is the guys that had a lot of money that could afford to punch a hole in the ground and then build these big giant refineries to purify it and turn it into fuel and everything else, they could do it so much cheaper. But what it did, it consolidated all that wealth. Instead of spreading out through the whole country, it consolidated that wealth within 4, 5, 6 families. And so that's basically what's happened with our food industry right now, is it's all getting consolidated. And you don't have the small dairy farmers anymore. You don't have the small guys that had gardens that they sold at the farmers market. That's starting to come back a little bit, but still, we're in a
Oh,
precarious situation. It's just like technology. When you concentrate all that in one area, it cuts off all alternatives. I think it's kind of like what's happened with the internet and iPhones and everything else. Is we're all dependent on these satellites, and we're all dependent on electricity and wires and everything else to keep us connected. And if we had a sunspot like we had back in the 1800s, it wiped out a bunch of the telegraph lines. If we had the same thing, it would wipe out our satellites. And you couldn't get gas, you couldn't even get groceries. So
you couldn't have access to your money. You couldn't open the doors to get to the grocery stores. Everything is digital.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm all for it. I use, here we are right now. So, but it's just kind of a scary place to be in. It's kind of like losing electricity in the middle of the winter.
Well, look what happened in Texas. I mean, this is just kind of a small piece, or the big, what was it? The land hurricane. I don't remember what it's called, that hit Iowa and the Midwest and knocked out the millions of acres in, land and agriculture. And, us, how dependent we are on technology and what happens in a snowstorm, and now Texas is without power for days because they drop below 20 degrees or, stuff like that. That's just, it's an eye opener. What are solutions?
Something that I think is other things important for people that are thinking about the hemp industry is you have to have a constant, product. You have to have a known supply and a known, well, it has to be the same. Like if you're Toyota and you're going to buy, okay, so if we're going to supply fiber for Toyota, they want to know 2 things. Are we going to get the same quality every time? And is your supply chain enough where we're never going to run out? So that's 2 things right there that if you don't have those things, you're not going to ever have an industry that's going to be sustainable. And
so when we talk about growth, I think what you just said is extremely important for people to hear, especially when we get so many people buying or getting into decorticating facilities that are small, pull behind your truck. Is that sustainable? And why not?
Yeah, well, the other thing, if you're going to do this, the issue we've always had is it's the chicken and egg thing. Toyota is not going to switch over to natural fibers until they know that they have somebody that's going to be able to process it and supply them with consistent quality and a consistent supply.
Right.
And nobody is going to be able to processing facility until they know that the farmers can provide them with the feedstock for their manufacturing, for their processing. So, it's like, who's going to shoot first? Who's going to make the first move?
Which means the risk.
That's where it's always been. So what I've told people, the only way that I see that this thing that we can get out of this chicken and egg is through like a 5 or 10 year long-term contract that basically it's great for, like, say, we'll just use Toyota or Ford, somebody like that as an example. You go to them and say, look, if we can guarantee you, over the next 5 years and show you that we can ramp up and, you'll start buying, small scale from us, and we'll scale up each year. if you're going to buy if you'll sign a contract, it's non-binding. If we can't do it, if we
Right.
can't supply you, no harm, no foul. But in the meantime, you get all the PR that you're going to help the Kentucky or the American farmers by, offering this opportunity for them to participate in the new industry.
Mhm.
And it doesn't cost you anything. So to me, that is the way that you start. Then once you have those guys that say, okay, if you can supply us this quality of fiber and you can show that you can do this, then we'll do it. Then a manufacturer could go in and say, okay, we have this contract with Toyota, said they'll buy from us if we can do this. And then he goes to the farmers and starts a co-op or gets a group of farmers together and makes them part of the end product to give them some value added to it and say, look, you guys grow this, we'll process it and get it to them. And then to take it a step further, you have someone 150 miles or 200 miles away that's doing the exact same thing. And you have like 5 or 6 of these units. So if there's a crop failure in one area, then those other 4 areas can help supply your supply chain and gives the industry even a more confidence that you can do what you say you're going to be able to do. So
look at not just crop failure, right? What if, these parts and equipment, right? If we have a break in our supply chain and we can't get parts from China or from wherever your equipment comes from, and you go down and now you can't supply a contract like that. More and more, I see value in a co-op setting or a type operation, an operation like what you described for multiple reasons, and being able to give our rural farmers or small farmers a way to compete on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
But I see, I see a great future for it.
Well, I'd love to participate however I can. I would love to help put something like this together. Talk to me about standards really quick. A lot of people ask all the time, well, why isn't, if hemp is so great and there's so many opportunities, why isn't it mainstreamed? If it has the R value that it does for insulation, or if it is stronger or lighter or more sustainable, like claims have been, why isn't it being used? And a lot of conversation is in our groups are focused around these standards, right, that need to be created.
Well, I think it's like any industry, there's new technologies coming out all the time. They're able to now cottonize fiber that they can use for clothing. There's all these new technologies. The one that we're working on, it works with cannabis, but it works with really any lipid. So we'll be working in the food industry and the cannabis industry with this new technology, because it's basically what it does. We use a lipid, and in this case, when it comes to hemp, it'd probably be hemp oil, but it could be MCT oil, it could be olive oil, it could be anything. And but what we'll be doing is we've got these big reactors. We put the oil in, and then we'll put the floral material in there, or the high-end buds. And then basically what we do is we infuse these all the cannabinoids, the terpenes and flavonoids, we infuse it actually into the oil. Where right now what you have is a CO2 extractor or a ethanol extractor or hexane or something that has all the residual stuff in it. And when you use that, you lose a lot of the flavonoids or the cannabinoids and terpenes in the process, but you end up with a thick tar, and you take that tar, heat it up, heat your carrier oil up, mix it together, and now it's floating in there together. And that's why they say, shake your bottle before using it. And if they're filling out of a 55-gallon drum they've mixed up, getting continuity in, those 7,040 ounces that's in there. You've got to constantly keep it stirred up and everything. So this process infuses it into it, and you're in a closed system. So you don't lose any of the terpenes, you don't lose any of the cannabinoids or flavonoids, anything. And we can we could put some mint in there, and we could have a mint flavored CBD oil. We could put turmeric, ginger. I mean, we could put anything.
Or when you're extracting, you're not using a solvent.
It's not really. It's extracting, but it's more of a bonding process.
Sure.
So it is taking it out of it, but we're not. Extraction process to me is you're taking it out, and here it is right here. And what we're doing, we're not taking it out. We're transferring it into the oil and bonding it in the oil. So it can be used in the olive oil industry to flavor olive oils.
Sure.
We can flavor butter. We can flavor ghee.
Yeah.
Any lipid we can add flavor to in a way that's never been done before. So, and that's what has to happen in the hemp industry. In order to really be successful, you almost have to find a niche and come up with some kind of new technology or some way of harvesting or processing or doing, a value added to the end use of it to really be successful in this industry. So, to me, it's like, if I was an investor, I would be looking for these new technologies or new ways of doing things, and not be a me too, because, anybody that's building a ethanol extractor right now, there's already more extractors out there than could supply. It's the same thing that's happened with the CBD industry, the growing of it. Now there's so many extractors out there that, and the prices are dropping. I could buy, the guy called me the other day, he's got 1,500 pounds of, I think it's 14% CBD that's compliant, below 0.3 on the THC. He said, I just got to get it out of here. He said, I'll give it to you for $1 a pound. And so people just are, and he won't ever grow again.
Right.
And that's what I hate about this industry, that, it just, so many people got into it thinking they were going to make money and lost money and crashed the market. And anybody that built their, like a lot of people got into it and they spent money knowing they could get, a couple years ago, $8,000-$10,000 a kilo. So they built their business model around that. And now those guys are in trouble because that same kilo that they thought they were going to get a minimum of 8,000 for, now that same kilo is selling for $500, $600, $700, $800. So unless they can sustain themselves until this wave goes by of all this excess, whether it rots in the field or, who knows what's going to happen to it. But once that's gone, then you can have these contract growers like we're doing, and those guys will make good money. But, those people that lost money, my heart goes out to them, because those guys will never come back to the hemp industry. After you get burnt like that, you're like, the hell with that. I lost $50,000 or $100,000, don't even talk to me about hemp ever again. So that's what we're running into on a lot. So,
well, and I think that's where the CBD market, like when you say that CBD stole the hemp industry, because it did.
Yeah,
it tarnished so many farmers. And it's here, I'm like, no, we need to grow fiber, and we have this opportunity for this whole new market that is much, much bigger. And
we need to be looking at an agricultural crop if we're talking about helping all of America's farmers and building an industry around it. You're not going to you'll build cottage industries around CBD, but you're going to have to grow it as a fiber crop or food crop in order for it to become a mainstream commodity.
What, real quick, we're almost out of time and I don't want to keep you much longer, but on the big scale, who do you see, or where do you see product moving to? You know, who are our big buyers? Is it certain countries? Is it
The
industries?
food industry. Food industry is going to be big
Mhm,
because it's a great source of protein.
mhm.
You know, you can make milk out of it. Well, I wrote a story for John Rulak years ago. John has that company, Nativa.
Mhm.
Yeah, I knew John when he was selling compost bins at the back of his apartment in Ojai, California.
That's awesome.
Now he's got a, you know, over $100 million business going.
Yeah.
But um, to really, you know, where the industry is, where I see it going, said, well,
Mhm. Yeah.
I think it's going to be, food is going to be number one, fiber will be number two, but this thing I did for John Rulak, I wrote this story that he put in his little book he wrote. Um, it was basically, you know, you wake up in the morning and you pull your hemp sheets and your hemp blanket back, and you know, move your hemp pillow away, and you step onto your hemp carpet and put on your hemp slippers, go to the bathroom, wash your hands with hemp soap, brush your teeth with a plastic hemp
Yep.
toothbrush,
Plastic toothbrush. Yep.
hemp toothpaste. You shower with hemp shampoo, dry off with a hemp towel, and go downstairs and have a breakfast with hemp milk and hemp nuts. Um, you know, uh, just and all the stuff you can do with, you know, and then you go out and get in your car that's made from hemp fiber
Mhm.
and drive to a factory that where you're working to process hemp. So, I mean, there's what people need to understand is anything that you can make from a hydrocarbon, you can make from a carbohydrate. If you think that, then that 1937 Popular Mechanics magazine that said there's 25,000 uses for it. Yeah, there's
At
probably,
least, right?
there's probably that many uses for plastic.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's where, you know, I see, you know, the food industry really being big in it, but the fiber industry and the carbon industry, I think are going to be big. So I think that's where it's headed in the future.
I agree with you. And I think it's very little what's spoken about, right? Our construction industry, our plastics are talked about a lot more, but I think that, yeah, our next wave is definitely going to be around the food and
Yeah,
protein.
yeah.
And really, this is where we're getting support from our USDA, right? Is around exploring these alternative options for food.
Yeah, I mean, we did a study, a couple different studies years ago. One was feeding fish, you know, hemp meal, which they did great on, and the other was using fiber in concrete instead of these plastic fibers,
Mhm.
and it was coming back that it was stronger than the plastic fibers,
Mhm.
you know, the petroleum fibers. So it's exciting. I mean, just to see an industry in its you know, infancy and being part of you know, helping, you know, make that a mainstream crop again has been just exciting. So, you know, when I go back to beliefs thinking that was the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life, ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me, because now, you know, I've got a legacy to leave my kids and grandkids, you know, being part of starting a whole new industry. I think what Thomas Jefferson said, and I'm paraphrasing, it's like the best thing a person can do for his country is to add another crop in the rotation of the fields. So, you know, just being part of that, you know, and having a small part in it has been, you know, it's been a great story and a fun ride.
Makes you feel good. It should. It
Yeah.
makes me feel good to talk about it. It's so exciting. And people say all the time, well, why do you even care? I don't have a business in the hemp industry, but I wholeheartedly believe what you're doing and what people along the same journey are doing is what will change our world, right? It will
Yeah.
change, will give our kids an opportunity and a chance. And yeah, I'm excited to see them get their hands on it and really make change.
Yeah.
I would love to see it.
When I started, Manny, I had no idea that, I mean, the furthest thing from my mind was to be in the hemp business.
Oh yeah.
And, here 28 years later, I am. And, I like to tell people I'm overnight success. So,
Years.
but, I mean, just being able to see the industry, go from, being a pariah to turning into a mainstream crop is really, it's been a great journey and a lot of fun just to watch it happen.
So to leave your legacy, what would be the last thing that you hope to see happen? And what's that time frame look like?
Well, what I tell people is we're looking at, like I was talking to the 5-year contracts, but I think it's going to be, it took soybeans 40 or 50 years to become a mainstream crop. I think 20 years. I think 20 years, and you'll have a lot of research. You'll have a lot of genetics developed for specific, applications. But I say 20 years. I'll hopefully I'll still be around to see how it turns out. But you never know.
I can't wait.
Every day is I wake up and going, damn, I'm still here.
Get another chance to do it right.
Hey.
I hope you finish your timeline with getting out of bed, turning down those sheets, stepping into those slippers in your carpet. Yes, that's
right.
That's it. I want to build a home. That's my goal. I want a home out of hemp and grapes and the whole thing. So
that would be cool.
Well, thanks, Joe. Really appreciate you. If anybody needs to get a hold of you or wants to, how do they find you and reach out to you or learn more about your company?
Well, our website, and for some reason you can go on Google and get it, but just to type it right in, for some reason, I don't know, GoDaddy's having a problem today or something, but it's Halcyon, it's HALCYON 420.com.
Okay.
And my email address is joe@halcyon420.com. So,
Awesome.
and I get, I try to help everybody out, and I get calls and emails a lot. So if you email me and I don't email back, just keep going, because I'll eventually, get to it. So.
Well, and you attend quite a few events. If people want to listen to you speak or get to know you, I always encourage people attending those events, like the NOCO event, right?
Yeah.
Or what was the other one that you just recently went up to?
You've got NOCO, and then you've got the Southern Hemp Expo, which is going to be in, I think, where is it? It's like North Carolina or South Carolina, I think. It might even be Virginia, but
for sure.
Yeah, but I go to a few of them. I try to keep busy, and I do like going because it's a lot of fun just seeing a lot of my friends.
Meeting people, right? Well, so that's what I was saying is feel free to show up to those events, support them. They're great ways to build relationships and meet people like you. And so anyways, I'll definitely be attending, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you very, very much. If there's anything I can do for you and your team, I'd love to collaborate. I'd love to continue to share what you're doing and share the message. And
I feel the same way. So any way that I can help you, or anybody, I'm more than glad to do anything that's going to help promote the industry.
Cool. Well, thank you very, very much, Joe. We'll sign off now. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. If you do, I guess, do enjoy or like, I hate this part, Joe, every time. Like, share, subscribe, and follow. We'll talk to you guys later. Thank you very much. See you later, Joe.
Take care.
See
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.